On October 16, 2024, Nick Carbó passed away at the age of 60. I had never read his poems. Instead, I knew of him because in my early 20s, having only written poems for a couple years, I picked up a copy of his anthology, Pinoy Poetics. Like many Filipino poets, just knowing this anthology existed was my introduction to a tradition wider than myself, let alone that such a thing as Asian American poetry might exist. In similar fashion, Carbó was himself someone whose name carried a mythical rarity. His verse novel, Secret Asian Man, has a title that so resonates with the precarious, multiracial swirl of colonization and ingenuity that creates the Filipino body. It's as close as we get to a Filipino-American literary classic. As it turns out, Pinoy Poetics was the last of 3 anthologies of Filipino poetry Carbó was the editor of, Returning a Borrowed Tongue, Bayabahan, and Pinoy Poetics. 4.
Can I just read the microphone?
There's a microphone hanging around it.
I can read it.
From these hidden generations of Filipino poets whose intercontinental migration swept through Poetry Magazine and MFA programs, it appears the acquiescence Lumbera described flows in many directions. Of these Filipino poets, Jose Garcia Villa remains as a particularly interesting example. As a college student at the University of the Philippines, Villa got expelled for publishing a series of poems titled Man Songs, all deeply expressing same-sex desire between men. That same year, he won a short story prize, which gave him the money to move to the United States and resume studies at the University of New Mexico. 2.
In the 1930s, Filipino poets began to publish their poems in the most prestigious poetry magazine in America, Poetry, a Magazine of Verse, edited by Harry Monroe. In 1932, 3 poems by Jose Garcia Villa. 1934, 4 poems by N.V.M. Gonzalez. 1936, 6 poems by Carlos Bulosan. 1937, 4 poems by Carlos Bulosan. Were these poems by Filipinos published alongside American poets Ezra Pound, Robert Frost, William Carlos Williams, Marion Moore, and Edna St. Vincent Millay, full of grammatical errors and misuse of words? 3. Not entirely unrelated is the NYC-based Asian American literary organization Kumiman, which draws its name from a type of Filipino song to a beloved who is secretly the nation, which seems innocuous to the Spanish missionaries, a way of expressing the yearning for independence under the noses of the colonizers tethered to poetry's roots in song and music, along with politics and art in ways that preceded 19th century European sensibilities. 5.
Okay. The body of poetry Jose Garcia Villa developed is full of formal experiments, of which my favorite are his comma poems. By using commas to isolate every word, Villa's poems ask the reader to see each word as an object, emphasizing the gears in William Carlos Williams' definition of poetry, a little machine made of verbs. These comma poems also anticipate Sadiana Guy's theory of beginning, where the 3 forces of labor, time, and value are thrown out of harmony. As the reader has to experience each word anew, the reader is constantly experiencing Guy's definition of beginning. It is trying too hard because it's not working hard enough, because its promises of value are unconvincing, because it is instructing me exactly how to consume it, and so on. 6.
"136" by Jose Garcia Villa. The hands on the piano are armless. No one is at the piano. The hands begin and end there. there no one's hands are there, crystal and clear upon the keys, playing what they play, playing what they are, playing the sound of identity. Yet how absurd, how absurd, how absurd. 0.
In the introduction for both of the anthologies of Filipino poetry he edited, Nick Carbó points out a central problem in how we might systematize poetry from the Philippines. The production of literary works happened in the Philippines long before colonization. Specifically, in Returning of Our Tom, Carbó notes that because the United States acquired the Philippines from its war on Spain in 1898, a type of literary apprenticeship emerged with an influx of sensibilities for British Romanticists and Victorian periods. This apprenticeship entailed normalization of literary genres recognizable to Western readerships: poetry, fiction, memoir, etc. As a poet of the Filipino heritage myself, I cannot help but note the unrelated but still circular way these traditions inevitably shape my own writing as a subject to the United States. 1.
The mid-20th century Filipino scholar Veliz Books described the interjections of Western literary forms into Filipino culture as an assertion and acquiescence by the Filipino creative imagination. From the Mongols conquering the Han Chinese people, the long history of Pan-Asian cultures is full of people being dominated, only for their conquerors to be assimilated into that society. Carbó intricately traced out and himself was part of several generations of Filipino writers who came to the U.S. and were educated in MFA programs, some staying in the West, but many returned to teach creative writing in the Philippines. For those who stayed, Filipino-American poetry has been at times almost a thing, as Carbó writes in the introduction to the anthology Pinoy Poetics. 3.
Yes, we can go again.
Not entirely unrelated is the NYC-based Asian American literary organization, Convergence, which draws its name from a type of Filipino song to a beloved who is secretly the nation, which seemed to not exist with Spanish missionaries, a way of expressing the yearning for independence under the noses of the colonizers, telling poetry's roots in song and music along with politics and art in ways that preceded 19th century European sensibilities. 2. In the 1930s, Filipino poets began to publish their poems in the most prestigious poetry magazine in America, Poetry, a magazine of verse, edited by Harriet Monroe. 1932, 3 poems by Jose Garcia Villa. 1934, 4 poems by N.B.M. Gonzalez. 1936, 6 poems by Carlos Buruzano. 1937, 4 poems by Carlos Buruzano. Were these poems by Filipinos published alongside American poets Ezra Pound, Robert Frost, William Carlos Williams, Mary Moore, and Edmund St. Vincent Millay, quote, quote, full of grammatical errors and misuse of words? 5.
The body of poetry which Jose Garcia Villa developed is full of formal experience, of which my favorite are his comma poems. By using commas to isolate every word, Villa's poems ask the reader to see each word as an object, emphasizing the fears in William Carlos Williams' definition of poetry. Quote, a little machine made out of words. These quote-unquote comma poems also anticipate Sienna Negai's theory of beginning, where the three forces of flavor, time, and value are thrown out of harmony. As the reader must experience each word anew, the reader is constantly experiencing the guy's definition of beginning. Quote, it is trying too hard because it is not working hard enough, because its promises and value are unconvincing, because it is instructing me exactly how to consume it, and so on. 1.
The mid-20th century Filipino scholar Bienvenido Rivera described the introduction of Western literary forms into Filipino culture as an assertion and an acquiescence by the Filipino creative imagination. From the Mongols conquering the non-Chinese people, the long history of Pan-Asian cultures is full of people being dominated, only for their conquerors to be assimilated into that society. Carbó intricately traced out and himself was part of several generations of Filipino writers who came to the U.S. and were educated in
Sometimes that's
little sound work with that. Only to teach creative writing in the Philippines for those who stayed Filipino-American poetry has been at times almost a thing. As Carbó writes in the introduction to the anthology Poets, 6.
136 by newspapers said the hands on the piano are harmless. No one is at the piano. The hands begin and there. There, no one's hands are there. Crystal and clear upon the keys. Play what they play. Play what they are. Play the sound of identity. Yet, how absurd. How absurd. How absurd.
These Western sensibilities also influenced Carbó. In The Struggle for Form, a conversation between him and Filipino novelist M. Evangelia Galong, he discusses two ultimate forms he was working towards: Hong Kong martial arts and gangster films. And Stefan Mallarmé's A Roll of the Dice Will Never Abolish Chance. As someone who also found Mallarmé's chance experiments to be an early influence, I read this pairing of French poetry and Hong Kong cinema to concern the impulse to put form over content. In the introduction to the anthology American Hybrid, Paul Swinson delineated two polarities into U.S. poetry: a British mode rooted in the pastoral and a French mode that circles around games and formal shapes. Implicitly, Carbó announces his allegiance to the francophone mind. Kiri Dalena's 5-video installation, Pila Lines, traffics in the inescapable tension that comes from West colonizing East. Its medium, video art, and genre, documentation are both thoroughly Western categories of art making. However, Dalena's work outside the camera lens, where she gathered food donations and set up a pantry table close to her home, serves as a vivid example of Bayanihan, a kind of community-oriented spirit necessary to survive the tropical storms that regularly pass over an island country. Even larger than Dalena is a message that united many of these food pantries across the Philippines. Give what you're able to give and take only what you need. Bienvenido Rivera's notion that the Filipino imagination acquiesced Western influence gets subverted in Pila lines. Instead of continuing the hyper-nationalized and atomized neoliberalism that often gets passed to colonized countries, it seems that in total crisis, the distinction between West and East dissolves and something hybrid emerges. One there, thank you. Just give you everything.
Yeah, this is awesome. So now we're going to have a little Q&A. So that's going to be Sam's mic, unfortunately. But you're welcome to ask any questions to Anthony or myself. I didn't really do this much, but yeah, or any thoughts that you have on the performance. Part of the idea of Convergence research is also that these are kind of works in progress. So the discussion is an important way of kind of like unpacking what we just saw.
I was wondering if you could talk about how you conceive and arrive at this mechanic of performance subverted.
Mostly 15 minutes ago. Actually, what was really great in collaborating with and thinking about this for the last couple months is sometimes as writers, I feel like we have a strange relationship to like material and with what is immaterial with our writing that can be made hard to kind of allow interdisciplinary things in. So I really appreciate kind of Anna pushing me to kind of think about how to open up my writing. I've never presented my writing in this kind of way. And as you know, when we're like authors, we tend to like having control. So kind of having the group thing allowed me to kind of relinquish control. To talk a little bit about what the writing actually is. So this is an in-progress piece for an anthology that's coming out in 2026 called Migrating Craft. And that's asking writers with immigrant backgrounds to write about how immigrant identity informs their writing craft. And when I first got asked and saw the prompt, I was just like, I don't know. Last fall, Nick Carbó passed away, and then I saw this at kind of the opening, and I was like having feelings about both. And a piece of like writing advice I got once was your feelings are your future thoughts. So I was like sitting and watching this and having feelings. I was like, future thoughts, please come. And so I threw in the application for the Convergence research, hoping that this could be kind of a checkpoint on this essay that I was kind of lost on. It's also kind of breaking it apart. I was kind of joking with Tom, friends I've been talking to, brainstorming this, that sometimes there's like the thing where you just have people read your writing back to you, and I'm like, this is just an elaborate thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I often feel like it's related to like a common poem thing, like this like unit that you have to give its own life, I guess, like in the
Oh, that, yeah, kind of like breaking down. That's what I think is like kind of really cool about this.
Yeah, it's a decomposition.
Yeah, where we did get to see, it really is a poem where there's a comma separating literally every single word. So it kind of like starts breaking down the meaning and use the words as objects. Is there another question?
Speaking of the poem, how did you decide which sections to give to the audience? And a follow-up maybe would be, would you be open to changing the sections or like that?
I think really they're just the middle parts of the essay. I just like broke them into sizable chunks. This actually goes back to Jack's question, but how this kind of evolved in working with Anna was at first I was like, look, I'll read the first couple paragraphs and then kind of start calling numbers at random. And then when we did the rehearsal here last week, I was like, it's kind of boring for me to read that much. I'm just going to read kind of a paragraph and then kind of start letting it interweave. And then 15 minutes ago was when I was like, okay, actually I'm going to have other people call it out and push more control. What was helpful was, because it is in progress, our hearing, it was both kind of great hearing people and other voices talk about Filipino literary history, and also just like the moments where I was just like, I'm so sorry I didn't say that, that's not going to get the final version of the essay. Sometimes, I think through some of the rehearsals, and it happened a little bit with this one, where sometimes by rejiggering it, just different connections happen. Like the way in which like Veliz Books kind of came up in this iteration, it was kind of fascinating for me, like tracking to be like, okay, now we're just kind of in the middle but haven't introduced him. I think we had number 2 that had like a list of poets. I thought that came, I think when it came up first, I thought that was really interesting. And that was also one that I think was a lot of great putting out. Yeah. Any other great
Do you see non-linearity being part of the final essay, or?
Not this one, but it is something I've tried before. I was actually just thinking earlier today about a manuscript I'm trying to finish that is kind of a verse novel. And I was like, oh, it would be fun someday to have it published and be like, I'm just going to read them all in backwards order so I don't worry about the narrative. I have that writing things I've had where it's like, okay, I'm actually just going to read it backwards. I think my writing does move in pieces that way.
I was really interested in your use of repetition and just how that worked and shifted what was happening. And I wonder, kind of in line with this question, if you're thinking about repetition coming into this final piece, collaging them perhaps, thinking about them visually.
Right. Exactly. I think kind of breaking them up, because some of the pieces of paper, it's like, okay, a whole paragraph, and it tries to really kind of be like, okay, this is only a portion of the paragraph. And I do think, I don't know if repetition will be, I don't think it will be on the surface of the final thing, but it is a fun place to be as a writer, where it's like, you know, we always use the method of kind of like breaking up open a piece of writing, and this is kind of doing that literally, to be like, okay, here's just this isolated, here's me hearing it in another person's voice. It's just like a thing where it's like, I'm really gonna cut that thing later, and also, like, seeing openings for kind of slipages.
I couldn't help but think about this artwork and how it is in segments. Were you thinking about that when you were designing this and in the segments?
I think early on, and then it does kind of happen kind of naturally, I think. I mean, I really wanted to tie it to this piece, not just because it was resonates with the content, but I also just trust that those resonances happen. It was so cool when I was like reading, and part of the projector was like projecting onto my paper, and I could see like the video, and I was just like positioning it to be like, okay, maybe this is cooler. Any other questions? Oh, Erica.
So in a lot of these excerpts, you do start to ask questions about a canon or this idea of the lamb poetry, or who is like known, who is being known. And I'm curious about how a lot of that takes place with most of the islands in the United States, and especially with Kiri being an artist working in the Philippines, and also kind of appearing in that. And I don't know how much you looked into her, but she's also deeply invested in archives and these almost like like musicals. So I'm just interested in kind of that connectivity and how you're thinking about orienting towards.
Yeah. Something that really kind of, especially in the little bit that I have written about this piece, which is really just like 150 words, so I haven't really gotten that deep in it yet. But I couldn't help but think about one of the Scion pieces that was here this summer, the Games of the Superstructure, I think is what it was called, that traced out, that was like Western modernism, avant-garde, conceptual art, neoliberalism, and Nietzsche information. And this piece was really kind of in conversation with that for me, and I kind of both felt, I felt in two ways I was kind of getting an outside look as like not someone who's also not in the Philippines, hasn't spent a lot there, but also someone who's not in the visual art world and doesn't entirely understand those traditions. But it was like that conversation was like, okay, there's something happening with Filipino visual art and its relation to Western media, Western traditions. I can't help but think about, like, what I was trying to get at the end is how this piece is, you know, it's video art, it's documentary, and it's kind of Western traditions, but it's also, its cultural context is so Filipino too. Any other questions?
Okay, well, that's all. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for participating. I wish I could